Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight I am proud to be with Brian Walker of Brian's Drive-In Theater, and we're going to celebrate Sword and Sandal cinema. And today's a special tribute show. Greetings and welcome, Brian. How are you?
I'm well tonight, Hercules. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. We might be joined by Sophia. Sophia is my puppy. She keeps me company while I work out in a room filled with Hercules movie posters. And she watches Peplum movies with me, so she might have something to say.
Well, excellent.
So Dave Draper was an icon, and I have several books that Dave Draper wrote.
Me too.
They were very interesting in that he had a very laid back approach to life and a very laid back approach to bodybuilding, even though he was definitely obsessed with it. He dressed up, I don't know if it was for movies or for like ads that he was doing for other things, in Peplum gear. And I put one up to commemorate that today. And he also, I believe, actually did a show that I've been dying to do throughout much of my career. So hopefully I'll be able to emulate him with that as well.
Well, the pictures that you're talking about were largely from a year-long TV show that he did for an independent television station out of Los Angeles, which was KHJ in Los Angeles, which is now KCAL. And that station has been around since the late 1940s. It was one of the first television stations in California, if not the first. Other than its early association with the Dumont network, and Dumont was sort of the first television network, and it has always been an independent station. Dumont was a network for about 10 years. During the first days of television. And when they went under in 1956, ABC, the American Broadcasting Company, picked up a lot of their stations, but that station actually went independent and is independent to this day. It was owned by General Tire at the time. If you've ever owned a set of Generals, that's who owned that television station, which I think is kind of interesting. And they decided to do a Saturday night series in 1964, and they advertised for big built beefy guys, and he got the job. He was young too. He would have only been like 21, 22 years old. He does. I mean, yeah, he looks. He could be 17 years old, except for the physique. He looks very young. But for about a year, he sort of like Svengoolie, the horror host on WGN on Saturday nights. On Saturday nights from 8 to 10, Dave Draper was David the Gladiator and would host a Peplum film. And there were so many, in television syndication packages back then that he probably could have done the show for several years, instead of just 1 year. And I don't think, given what I've read about some of his comments when he was doing the show, I don't think he realized how fondly remembered it was, how many people loved the show until, the internet started getting populated with content back in the late 90s. And I think he was just blown away by the fact that so many people remembered him and remembered him as David the Gladiator. His was one of the earlier pages that I did on my website, and his wife would message me with information. I think she even sent me some photos that I've used on the page, and it was just fantastic. 99% of the people that I've run into, that I've gotten to meet, I should say, through the drive-in have been just amazing, awesome people. And Dave and his wife, Laurie, are certainly two of them. Very, very nice people. And loved the fact that, people remembered him and loved him. And we're so interested in how his life was today, and how he was doing. I think it really impressed him.
He inspired me by doing that, and actually a variation of his doing that show is something I've wanted to do, and it's come close to coming into being a couple of times. Once this cable network, they optioned my Fringe TV show, and unfortunately that network never came to be, and it kind of sunk amid a lot of controversy with people trying to pull it together. But that was one of the ideas I pitched to them that they were willing to consider. So again, it didn't come to be. And then a second time, right before the pandemic, I found a local TV network that was interested in it. And they were actually interested in several of my ideas. But then lo and behold, the pandemic came. So that never came to be. So that remains something that somebody did that I'd like to try as well. So who knows? Equipment's becoming more affordable, and it might be something we can pull off without anybody's assistance in a short time.
And you know what? You've got a YouTube channel. You can
Yes.
broadcast it yourself. And it's great if you've got a team behind you, but if you don't, do it anyway. And so many of these movies are public domain that if you can just get through and there's some way to navigate the waters of, is it public domain or isn't it on YouTube somehow. I've known people who've done it. That you could figure that out, pretty quickly, and make sure that they didn't, censor you if you were hosting one. And well, how would you do it? Would you? I'm going to guess that you would do it much like he did, with a lot of respect for the films, and do the atmosphere right with the background and everything, but. Not make fun of the movies, but maybe hand out interesting. No, I know you wouldn't. But maybe some interesting trivia, about the films in breaks, or something about the production of it would be interesting. Just the more information, wherever you can, sort of connect the dots. I find when horror hosts and others who use a framing device around some sort of pre-existing film, when they do that, when they provide you with additional information, I find that really helpful. And the more you can learn about the production of these movies, the better.
If that comes to pass, would you like to be the information guy? We could definitely.
I would certainly give it a shot. I'm not the end all be all, but I can run a mean internet search. So I would certainly love to help.
But you are Brian of Brian's Drive-In Theater, so you're already a legend in the Peplum community who's built
but not omniscient.
But you already have that legendary status, so you wouldn't have to be Brian the Gladiator, but you could have some similar persona. We could put Greek temples or something behind you, or something. I think we could do a great thing with it.
Yeah, and with a green screen and some, doesn't have to be great camera equipment, but just decent camera equipment, which is now so cheap. Or even if you've got, my cell phone's nothing to write home about. It's an iPhone, it's only about a year old or so, but even it takes pretty good, video. And
I don't know how to use it. One of our hosts, Dr. Barbara Becker-Holstein, she's a women's empowerment psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been doing something called the Selfie Project, where she's been encouraging people to make selfies to talk about various topics. Like one of her ones that she's doing has been how people have been affected by the pandemic, and she's been gathering voices. So I'm working with her on a project now. We're going to be looking at how do stories affect people. So you are someone who's definitely been impacted by B movies of different sorts. So how has that made you the person that you are, and how has that affected your life? So we can start by doing something like that and producing those type of things, and then we can rebroadcast them as we start a new adventure.
Well, it's interesting that you say that too, because on Thursday, I am doing an installation at one of the university libraries at the university that I work for, West Virginia University. And it's an installation of my movie memorabilia. And I got to tell, I had to make a run to my mom's house to pick up some stuff that I had left there, as a teenager when I moved out. And it was a real trip down memory lane for me. This is stuff that I started collecting when I was about 8 or 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a long time ago too, about 50 years almost. And it was, I got to tell you, it sort of reinvigorated me just going through all of this old stuff. I started out as a Super 8mm, hobbyist. As a child, I was a kid, and I went through. I still have every film that I ever bought, ever collected, and I'm going to display some of that in this library installation. And it's I'm also going to use some press books and a couple of peplum pieces that I have. I've got a lobby card and a press book that I'm going to use in one of the glass displays. I'm really looking forward to it. And like I said, going through all the stuff that I had collected as a child, and my mother never threw anything away. So it's, I was able to grab it all and then bring it back to my house, which is about a 4-hour drive.
Wow.
It was just so much fun to go through, and I started remembering how I got into all of this, and it was all just, I'd always liked watching movies, but when you start collecting, bits and pieces, that means you're more than just, a passing fan of something. You've got an investment in it, an emotional investment, and just going through all that stuff, it really put a smile on my face. But I collected and never threw away all of these trade publications for Super 8mm in the 1970s. And I still, they're in boxes, unfortunately. I have boxes of the stuff because there must have been 15 of them.
Wow.
and I subscribed to them all, apparently. One of the benefits of being an only child was, I guess, stuff. And that was an expensive hobby, certainly for a child. Very expensive. I was going through the catalogs and looking at the prices of complete films, which, depending on the length of the film, was anywhere from 4 to 7 reels. And some of these things were $400 and $500, and this was in late 1970s money. Yes, an amazingly expensive hobby. I only had 4, I believe, full-length films because they were so expensive, and I think I bought 2 of them used, as I remember, because back then the used market was a great way to get a piece that you couldn't afford new. And I would buy. They had classifieds in a film in a publication I used to subscribe to called Film Collectors World, and you could go through the classifieds to see who was selling what, and they could, if they printed their phone number, you could call them to ask them if they still had it. And I bought a couple of Super 8mm full-length features that way.
Take pictures, plenty of pictures, and let's share them.
I will do that. And this isn't my first installation at the library. We did one a few years ago with our collection of automobilia and vintage automobile-based toys, which we had a lot of stuff out there. I was kind of shocked at how many pieces we had of our collection in that installation, and around our house I couldn't tell it because there are 2 types of things in my house. Well, 3 actually. I like old album covers, so I've got a lot of those framed. Old movie posters are everywhere. They're in every room, even in the bathrooms. And we do have a shocking number of semi-expensive vintage toys
Oh,
that
wow.
we've collected like over the last. Some of this stuff was actually mine when I was a kid. There again, my mom didn't throw anything away, and I was oddly fastidious when it came to my toys. If I took them outside to play with them, I cleaned them back up, before I
Mhm.
brought them back in. So they're all in relatively good shape, even though they were played with. I guess I took care of my stuff. That's another nice thing about being an only child. Nobody's breaking your toys.
That is great. I'm glad that you still have that stuff. We had a flood here, and we went to help my mom clear out some of her stuff too. So there was all sorts of my stuff that she hadn't thrown away down there.
Oh
Not
wow,
15 boxes worth, but maybe a couple of boxes worth. And we found a Barnabas Collins like T-shirt from when Dark Shadow
really?
was on TV. Yeah, for a little kid. So that was one of the things. There was a Barnabas poster. That one didn't survive the years very well, but
Oh,
it's intact. And my sister, when she was looking for stuff, said she thinks my Dark Shadows album is somewhere down there. So that's what I'm gonna look for next.
I had the board game.
I had the board game too.
Because my mother and I used to watch Dark Shadows. It was on in the afternoon,
Yes.
and even when I would get home from school, I got home early enough to catch it. It was brilliantly positioned, during the day on the lineup, so that I think kids and teenagers could watch it once they got home from school. And I was crushed when it went off. I
Me
just couldn't
too.
understand why. I was like, why did you take this off? Everybody loved it. But yeah, I had the board game, which is essentially Hangman, but it was
Yeah.
fun. The cover of the board game's it's a Milton Bradley, board game,
Mhm.
and it's got this beautiful cover on it, very atmospheric.
There
And
was
I
the
still
coffin,
have
I
it.
remember, and the stakes. And I used to have the model to a Barnabas and the Wolfman. So those are part of the scenario. I remember I built this cardboard house to house my figures, and the Barnabas Collins model was in the Barnabas Collins coffin from the game. And I used rubber bands to represent chains, whenever they captured them and had
Mhm.
them down there in my play.
Yeah, I didn't have, unfortunately, I didn't have the model, of Barnabas Collins, but my dad did buy me the Universal, the Boris Karloff Visage,
Mhm.
um, plastic model that you put together as he's sort of coming out of the grave. Um,
Mhm.
and I see them a lot in antique stores where they've been put together and painted as mine was. I had, gosh, I had a lot of stuff like that now that I think about it. I also I loved old 1930s comedians and comedy. W.C. Fields, Laurel and Hardy, Wheeler and Woolsey, a big Charlie Chase, Thelma Todd, Patsy Kelly, a big fan of those old Hal Roach, shorts from the 1930s, which ran a lot when I was a kid in the 1970s. And because that stuff was in syndication and on TV, there was a lot of marketing that you could find. When I was at my mom's, looking for memorabilia, I found W.C. Fields puzzles.
Wow.
I found a W.C. Fields coffee mug. Um, she bought a rice mat for me, which was about 6 or 7 feet tall, and it was hanging in my bedroom when I was a child. And it has a silk screen of W.C. Fields on it, which is probably still down there somewhere. It hasn't rotted away. Um, it was so much. Being a kid was more fun back then. I would so not want to be a child now with all this surveillance and nothing's any fun. Yeah, it was much better back then.
And no pandemic.
Well, yeah, it did never never was on my radar until fairly recently. Well, that's not true. I mean, we've had other viruses. We wipe out millions of people during my lifetime, unfortunately. Um, but there's a lot of hysteria around this one, and rightfully so. It's made killed 800,000 people in this country. But
Now,
anyway, we probably should go back to more about Dave Draper.
okay.
And we talked a little bit about the TV show that he did, and I wish there were some existing footage of it. I have over the years looked everywhere, and all I can find are still photos. And I comb YouTube every once in a while, as I did last night, to see if anybody had even a few seconds of footage. And so much early television's gone, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, I guess I don't know if the show was ever kinescoped or what, but if it was, nobody seems to have a copy of it anywhere, which is sad. It would be great to see him in action. I was able to find some of his other appearances, because in the 60s he popped up sometimes on
Yeah.
TV shows. He was on the Beverly Hillbillies. And there are clips that you can see on YouTube of that. It boils the whole episode down into about 5 or 6 minutes, but that's okay. And if you're a music fan, especially the Monkees, you'll know that Mike Nesmith of the Monkees passed away somewhat suddenly just a few days ago, and Dave Draper was on the Monkees. He was on one of my favorite episodes of the Monkees, actually. It's called "I Was a 99-Pound Weakling." And it's a fun episode, and it was just I just found it oddly timed that both Mike Nesmith and Dave Draper that died just days between each other, and at about the same age. I think Dave Draper might have been like a year older or so. But and he's in a movie with Tony Curtis called "Don't Make Waves," and Claudia Cardinale called "Don't Make Waves." It used to run on AMC a lot back. Remember the days when AMC didn't have commercials?
Yes.
Like let's say 20 or more years ago. It used to run on AMC quite a bit, and I've seen the movie several times. It's a fun movie too, but he's in it, and it's fun to see him in it. It's a shame that he didn't explore more of that, because he had a real knack for it. He's kind of a natural, and at least we have what we've got. We can see bits and pieces of his work in television. It's just a shame that there's nothing existing of David the Gladiator. But it was it wasn't a network show. It was just a local television show.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, so much of that stuff it wasn't kinescoped, or even if it was, sometimes that stuff just got thrown away. It's a shame. It would have been fun to have seen it, and I'd like to see which I could not find, but I would like to see a list of the films that he hosted. I'd love to know which ones that he had access to. The Sons of Hercules was a syndication package all on its own.
Yes.
But that's separate and distinct from David the Gladiator. So I was figuring that probably the Sons of Hercules package probably didn't figure in because of the framing device at the beginning and at the end of the films. Although who knows, maybe it was, maybe that was part of it. But so many Sword and Sandal films, especially the ones made a little later, were released directly to television in syndication packages. Not all of them were released theatrically in the United States. I guess because there was such a desire for them to get them on television. My partner and I were talking just a few hours ago about how we remember seeing these on Saturday afternoon, or at different times, during the day. Often Saturday seems to be when Sword and Sandal Theater would be on, from my recollection anyway. I don't know about when you were watching it.
Back then, they used to be on weekend night. I remember because my cousin Ron Carson used to stay over, and we used
Oh,
to stay
okay.
till phenomenally late, and we'd watch old Pepple movies, or we'd watch
Yeah.
old wrestling shows like the WWF, I think it was back then.
Oh, you mean studio? You mean studio wrestling?
It was with Mil Mascaris and Cowboy Bob something, and real wild wrestling. And there were Peplum movies on the same night. Sometimes there were old science fiction or horror movies. So it must have been a Saturday night, because otherwise it would have been a school night. We wouldn't have been up to like 2, 3 in the morning watching these things. But yeah, they used to play late at night. And I remember these were the days when Channel 13 used to show bizarre movies late at night as well. So occasionally it was a weird Channel 13 PBS movie. And back then too, we talked about this before, there were several movie houses. It was the RKO Coliseum, which is where we get Ron Carson's Coliseum from. Then there were several others. Some of them very dubious and shady type of places, but there was one place where you could see movies that you kind of were watching on television, but heavily edited versions. And here you see the unedited, totally uncut versions. So we got to see a lot of horror movies as they were intended, European cuts, and also Peplum movies are still playing in these type of places. So we got to catch a lot of them. Again, the unedited versions of them as well.
See, by the time I became aware of Peplums, they were just in syndication packages on television, and at least from my experience, I found independent stations more often ran them, and most cities of even modest sizes had one independent television station, or at least you could pull it in if you had if you had a really good antenna on the top of your house or something like that. But our independent station was the one that I used to watch Tarzan Theater. They would run the old Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies, and even some of the Lex Barker and Gordon Scott Tarzan movies. And they would also have Sword and Sandal Theater. So, if it was a rainy Saturday afternoon, you had a 4-hour block there of entertainment, which was great. I guess I was there again, a spoiled only child, because I had a television in my bedroom. Not a great one, so it wasn't bad. But it was a television, yeah. And it was almost big enough to see. It was. One year for my birthday, I heard my parents whispering, and I had a black and white set in my bedroom when I was a kid, and I heard my mom tell my dad that she wanted to get me a color television. So I was really excited, with wow, color. And when I got it, I loved it that it was a color television set, but the picture was only about, it was a portable, and the picture might have been like 10, 11, 12 inches, something like that. But to tell you the truth, I didn't care at the time. I was just so happy to have a television, and my eyes worked back then. So I could actually see the little screen. But I can't tell you how many of these old movies that I watched on that little screen. A lot.
We didn't have a color TV so much later, so everything was the black and white TV. And then in Greece, which I used to go to a lot as a kid, they didn't have TV in the islands, and a lot of people didn't even believe in TV. I once had an uncle smack me because I was describing TV shows, and they didn't have TV, so he told me to stop lying.
Oh my!
Yeah. Then years later, when I went there, they had TVs. He spent half an hour talking about the two channels that they had that you can get on the TV, and explaining to me the details of changing channels. And that was one of the most bizarre conversations I've ever sat through in my entire life.
But remember, you unless you lived in a huge market, you didn't really get that many channels.
No.
You counted yourself lucky if you got ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, and let's say an independent station. That was like the best of both worlds. And my dad worked in electronics, so he was really good at the old televisions you could actually repair. New ones you can't. You can't fix these things. They're junk when they break. But back in the day when we were kids, chances are you just had a blown tube or something like that, and you just pulled the chassis out, replaced the tube, shoved it back in, you were done. And he and my mom did a lot of construction work on the side. He moonlighted quite a bit. And people were forever giving him like a 2-year-old television that had a blown tube, and they'd bought a new one, And we had old crappy TVs in practically every room when I was a kid. Some of them were color, some were black and white, but they worked, somehow. And he I don't know how he did it, and I don't know how much it. Well, he must have, because we got a lot of channels. He sort of fused 2 television antennas together. We lived in a very cold, windy area, and our antenna would blow off, the roof every so often. And my dad had pieces of 2 antennas that he'd bought over the years, both of which had flown off the roof, and he somehow mangled them together. And so this was like this big, television antenna that was on a roof, and he also put a rotor on it. And we had the rotor switch, in the living room. And if you were trying to dial in something from really far away, you would just push the button on the rotor, and then the antenna would turn until the station would just come in, I guess, better. And then you could fine tune it from there, on the tuner on the television. But he put a lot into that. We lived out in the country a little, a few miles, so we didn't have cable at the time. But back then, cable wouldn't have been any better, quite honestly. And we lived in such a flat area that you could get stations from miles away, especially with that Frankensteinian thing he mounted on the roof.
I remember those days. When the TV had that antenna thing with the dial, and you play with the things. Then if you were able to get a coat hanger, you could somehow connect the coat hanger to the back. You could increase the range of and the clarity of your picture. Yeah, I remember.
Did the coat hanger thing ever really work? I know people did it, but I never really knew anybody who said, "Yeah, this TV, this coat hanger brought in 2 more channels." Yeah.
It worked often enough and well enough where it was good to have the coat hanger back there, but it didn't work all the time.
Now that was just on rabbit ears, though. And depending on where you live, with rabbit ears, you could sometimes pull in, a few channels. My first, the first television I had was one that my parents got when they got married. It was this little black and white portable. It was still working even when I was a kid somehow. I guess that was my dad, changing, every 2 minutes, to keep going. But he thought that that dragging the coax back into my bedroom degraded the signal from the television antenna. So he wouldn't hook it up. Now, later on, he hooked it up to my color TV, and somehow that was totally fine, but I didn't question him on that one. Maybe he bought a booster or something. But I had to, on my first TV, I had to rely on the built-in, rabbit ears that were with it. And it could only get PBS reliably. On certain days, you could sort of get like one of the network TV stations, but usually it was just PBS. So I watched, on rainy days or snowy days, I watched a disturbing amount of
PBS.
PBS programming as a kid. I can still remember a lot of the children's shows that they ran.
PBS, I don't know where you live, but in New York and New Jersey, PBS, when they ran their movies, there was a lot of nudity and things on their movies. So I remember that was a big plus, and if your parents questioned what you were doing,
Plus.
oh, we're watching PBS. Oh, okay.
Well, and they used to, when I was a kid, they would run Monty Python,
Yeah.
like at 10 o'clock at night or something like that.
Mhm.
And that was a real eye opener, as a kid, because if I was in my bedroom late at night at that time of night watching television, and then Monty Python came on, and their comedy, you missed a lot of it as a child, but there was enough slapstick in it that you could
Yeah.
pick it up, pretty well, and I was hooked.
Me too.
But some of that was, pretty risque for American television at the time.
And Benny Hill, I remember that was.
Oh yes, with Boots Randolph yakety sax playing in the background. Yeah, that was pretty risque too. Now that,
Yes.
for 50 years ago, I guess I should
50
say.
years ago, yes.
Now pretty much anything goes, but not back then. Boy, you couldn't even swear on television. I can still remember. Yeah, I think it was one of the characters on MASH called someone a son of a bitch, and it was really controversial at the time.
Really?
That would have been like mid 70s or something like that.
Yeah, it should. Well, I never understood those "you couldn't say certain words" thing. I never I can understand it intellectually, but it just made very little sense that a civilization that calls itself advanced would single out certain words and say you can't say them.
Well,
Certain words,
George Carlin had a famous bit
yes,
about the 7 words you couldn't say on television. And I loved him. He was so funny. But I'm afraid he'd have to change that bit now.
yes,
He'd have to cut it down to about 3 or something. Maybe. Maybe some anatomical words he'd probably have to
right.
leave out. But some of the cruder stuff. But the rest of it, yeah, it would probably fly now. It's funny how times change.
Yeah, it is. It's very strange. Also, I look at the movies too. They were a lot more permissive back in the 60s than the 70s, and certain things were a lot more permissive than now. Like I was watching a movie the other day. It was called Breeders. It was like an outer space movie, and I was thinking you could not make this movie today. They would not allow you to make this movie today.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. And back in the day, if you mortgaged your house and you had a few friends who sort of knew what they were doing and some semblance of a script, you could make a movie and probably get it exhibited somewhere. You might not make any money, as I'm sure the distributor walked away with the lion's share. Yeah, but you could still do it. And now, other than doing something like YouTube, which is what we were talking about earlier, it would be impossible to get an independent film into theaters, into more than one theater. Let's put it that way. I don't think you could. I don't think it's even possible to do that now. Everything's so corporate, and one of the things I love about B movies is that gosh, anybody could make one back in the day, and they have a lot of heart, and that comes through in a lot of these Peplum films too. They didn't have huge budgets. Well, some Peplums had much bigger budgets than others, but they didn't have enormous budgets.
No.
Time is money. So if you've got, and a lot of the Peplum films have incredible numbers of actors on the set, and you've got to have everybody there on time. And if one person is screwing up or isn't doing his job, that you just cost a whole lot of money to the producer. So you had to you had to get it done once and done right. And there's a lot to be said for that sort of guerrilla style, you know, movie making. I think it's really honest, and it adds an element to movies that you can't fake. You can't generate that. It just has to occur naturally. And every once in a while, somebody will come along wanting to redo like a classic old, let's say, horror B movie from the 50s. And I cringe every time. Because if it is one of the campier, 50s horror science fiction movies, those were made honestly. And if you try to remake it in the same vein, I don't hate low camp, but it's low camp, And if you're going to do low camp, you have to make it witty. You've got to make it funny. You've got to have really good actors and an incredible script to get away with it. And most people don't get that far with it. There have been other, attempts to remake some older movies, but those are typically more successful because the original film was bigger budgeted, and a better quality overall, production. I think those are easier to remake, or it's easier to my tolerance for the remake is better. John Carpenter's The Thing, for example, I think is a good example of that. The original, The Thing from Another World, is a fantastic movie. It's the 1951 version. John Carpenter's version is a nice update on it. It really is. Now, I still prefer the first one, but I love John Carpenter's work, and the remake is really good. It's a very tense, at times very scary, as the original one was. But to remake, a fun old science fiction film, one that was unintentionally funny or campy or something like that, you can't do it. It just doesn't. It just doesn't make it, on the screen. You've got to add either something to it or just leave it alone.
Well, some of those movies were made inexpensively, as you pointed out, and they, like for instance in Plan 9 from Outer Space, they had shower curtains.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And blocks of wood for the airplane controls. Yeah.
And more recent, like the Blair Witch Project, showed us what you could do if you intentionally embraced the limitations that you have. The fact that you have a very small budget and you have limited equipment.
But that's what you should do as an independent filmmaker. You can't. Pie in the sky is great, but when the rubber meets the road, you've got to shoot this scene, and if you don't have what you need, you improvise. And Ed, like you said with Ed Wood and his shower curtains, trying to fake the facade of the interior portion, the cockpit, of an airplane. It doesn't look great, but if you've got good enough actors, and the actors in that scene that you're talking about with Greg Walcott, he was a good enough actor to sort of sell it.
Yes.
And if you've got the rumble of the engines in the background, the sound helps sell it too. So it does require the willing suspension of disbelief, but still though you can sort of, not quite buy it, but the visual does get in the way. But there again, something like Plan 9 is a movie that I can remember seeing as a kid in those old horror syndication packages that used to run all night on some of the television stations, and I used to stay up all night and watch those. And if I was watching it on my black and white or even my color TV screen, you couldn't really see it anyway. The picture was so small that it was like, oh well, I sort of buy this. So I can hear the plane, I can hear the engines rumble, so it's okay.
I remember, I don't know if they're still around anymore, but EI Independent Cinema, they used to be called Seduction Cinema before then. They made like really cheap, inexpensive movies that were sometimes based on like The Lord of the Rings or Planet of the Apes, or, they did a series of them, Blair Witch. And there, the suspension of disbelief had to be high. Like I remember they had an outer space movie that they filmed in someone's house or apartment. So the floor of the bridge in the spaceship was like parquet tiles, which I doubt very much
Nice.
will happen in spaceship. But, but but again, they did it so tongue in cheek that it's like you forgave them because it was funny in its own way, and they were parodying something. So the Sword and Sandal films originally too, they made use of what they had, and sometimes it was brilliant in its simplicity. Like the ruins, you've talked about them before. These places have ruins, so they made excellent use of the ruins and incorporated them into the movie, and it upped the production values in a way that they could never afford to do.
Well, certain genres kind of dictate how much you're going to have to spend on sets, and science fiction's tough because you're trying to project into the future, but all you have are the trappings of the past and present. And in old science fiction movies, like especially the ones from the 50s, they've just got a bunch of reel-to-reel tape recorders and things like that, and the basic switches that they probably bought at something like Radio Shack, or but they all looked like that, so you kind of bought it. But
Yeah.
with Peplum films, if you had a good costumer who could do period dress, and if you had access to the ruins that day and some 35 millimeter camera, some film stock, it looked fabulous. And I mean, how do you go wrong with the Italian countryside, or
Right.
or a scene shot in the ruins? And most of the people who populated Peplum films were pretty people. I mean, people who are pleasant to look at, and I think that goes a long way, toward the visual, in cinema. It's just having something. It's kind of like a Kubrick movie. It's just like having something pretty to look at. You know what I mean? Like 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, everybody loves that movie, but it's really just what's going on in the background. I mean, it's Keir delay and an old Windows machine having an argument. And I don't mean to dismiss it, because I love the film. I have the movie poster around here somewhere that I bought about 20 or 30 years ago. But it's just a pretty film to watch, and technically it had to have been a marvel for 1968. I mean, it still looks good. And doing it back then had to have been tricky. And I know they spent like 2 years or 2.5 years in production on the movie. So, I mean, it really shows on screen, though. You can tell that this was a horribly expensive movie to produce, and it looked fabulous. In terms of being riveting, not so much, but it sure does look good. And that's part of movie making, though. You want every penny that you spend on this production, you want it to show up on screen, and if you can magnify it, if you can make $2, look like $5, even better. And I think that's where the Italian cinema does a good job. None of their films, well, most Italian films did not cost that much to produce. They're everything's done to a price, or shot to a price. But they look good. The camera works great. The sets look good. Lighting in Italian films is so atmospheric and excellent. So well done, either in black and white or color. It doesn't really matter. They do lighting really, really well. And that goes a long way toward making a movie look good.
And if you learn a few tricks, like I remember when I had my Fringe TV show, I had people who are professionals. I'd have them like estimate how much it cost me to produce an episode. So they would give me a figure in the tens of thousands of dollars. I never spent more than $400 on any episode. But because I knew a few tricks, everything looked a lot better than it was. Like, for instance, locations. If you pick the right location, making it look pretty or atmospheric, people will forgive a lot. And
Yes.
I would play tricks on my audience too. Like, I had for an entire season, I would, every time you showed me in the same segment, I have a different sword. And nobody caught it except one person who stopped me in the street and asked me why my sword changed every time that they changed the thing on me. So I said I did it intentionally to see if anybody would notice, but he's the only one that ever noticed. And for another season, we planned it deliberately so that at least in one scene in each episode, you could see the camera crew reflected like in a mirror or in a silver surface or something, where, if only for a second or two, but if you look, you could see camera crew there. And we planned that deliberately. So again, it's accepting the limitations of what you have and asking yourself, what can I do that is cool, that could come about because I have these limitations? And they were really, really brilliant in what they did, because it seemed like they spent a hell of a lot more money than they did on these films.
Well, and I think that's the care that you take when you're producing something like that, when it is yours. I think that comes across as well, and that will make a production look better because you've thought of everything. I mean, you've tried to cross, every T and dot every I. And you're right. I mean, atmosphere is everything. If you've got, let's say, a fog machine, and a dimly lit brick wall. I mean, you can do something with it. That could be horror, science fiction. That could be noir. I mean, that could be the setting of so many different things. And if you've got the right lighting and the right camera angle, certainly the best eye behind that camera can really make a big difference. And one thing that I have found is, which I'm not doing tonight, unfortunately, but if I can get my camera up higher, when I'm doing something through Zoom or Teams, it sort of washes your eye bags out. No, my partner's laughing, but this is true. If you are shot from above like that, your eye bags sort of wash out. And I try to be photographed from above whenever possible. And I noticed tonight that because my camera isn't up high enough, my eye bags look horrible. But
I had noticed that.
well, the glasses help a little bit. If you keep those on, it's hard. It obscures the bag. And you can't see all the crow's feet either if you keep your glasses on.
I had noticed.
Oh, they're there. Trust me.
Well, thank you. It's amazing that no new peplums are being churned out, because the peplums have become popular in video games now. Nicholas Dyack does segments on that occasionally and posts things on it. But the video games look theatrical now. You'd swear you're looking at a movie. So you can manipulate the whole movie experience, but it's becoming popular. The amount of them that come out that he talks about is a lot. And then I find out about some that he hasn't mentioned by folks in our gaming show and so forth. And it is amazing. You, instead of just watching the peplum, you're now in the peplum as one of the characters. So I'm surprised that movies aren't coming out more to just kind of build that experience.
I don't think it's going to be much of a leap either. With all of the DC comic superhero movies, those are the blockbuster films these days.
Yeah.
There's not that to mythology is not a big leap.
No.
And in a way, very similar in concept and script motivation and such. You're right. I wouldn't be surprised that it will come back around again.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing that. I like the range of them. I like the ones that came out when I was a kid. I like the ones that are older than that, like Kabiria. that's ancient. I
Mhm.
finally tracked down the 1910, I think, was Hercules cartoon, the short. I finally found that in a collection. I haven't purchased it yet, but
Mm.
it took me years to track down a copy of that, and then I was able to get it from my local library to watch it. And then I like the stuff that came out during the sword and sorcery era, and all the different permutations of sword and sandal that had different cultures that are portrayed. And then for a while, it looked like with Gladiator and that era, it looked like more movies would be made, but they kind of fizzled out and ended with The Rock as Hercules, pretty much
I
in
agree
terms of.
with that. When the Russell Crowe Gladiator film came out, I just assumed that, well, this is the beginning of,
Mhm.
and it did spawn some imitators, but nothing like the. I
No.
expected an avalanche, because that film was so big and so popular. But it didn't. It didn't spawn, any, I guess, worthy contenders. Um,
He's
but
playing
it's
Zeus, by
surprising.
the way, in Thor: Love and Thunder. Russell Crowe is playing Zeus,
Oh, really?
and he gets killed by Gore the God Butcher. That's what the rumor is, anyway.
But you're right. I think that that could certainly, come back around, and it would be interesting, especially with, yeah. There are people today who are so fit, above and beyond what most of us remember, back from the '60s and '70s. They would have their pick of gladiators,
Right.
a male and female. Um, it seems a natural to me, and the plots are timeless. It's always, a hero facing adversity and having to make a journey in order to either, right a wrong or to restore, his dignity. It's a very basic premise, but it's one that appeals to a lot of people. And in the United States, we tend to, we like a hero that we can sort of, bond with, somebody we can see ourselves as. Um, Other cultures don't seem to be as invested in the protagonist as we do. We seem to have a protagonist that we like. Other cultures can have one that's really not such a great person, but we seem to have one who's, at least in the American idiom, admirable.
Yeah, you're right. We love heroes that we can identify with, or we can put ourselves in their shoes. And back when I used to do more, I used to work in the therapeutic settings, and I did a lot of like motivational type of talking. I would point that out, that the hero in the movie that you're watching or in the book that you're reading isn't the person who only good things happen to them. Usually it's the reverse. Horrible, crappy things are happening to them. But you can identify them as the hero, and you're rooting for them to overcome the obstacles. And I would kind of walk people to the realization that whatever their story happens to be, they're the central character in their own story, in their life, or they
Mhm.
should be. And therefore, when something bad or unexpected or unwanted happens to you, you should be rooting for yourself, because the whole point is you're the hero. So you're going to overcome this. You're going to pass beyond it. You're going to grow through it. You'll be able to put it behind you rather than remaining stuck there. And that to me is something I got from the movies and from the old tales. That's a much better way of looking at life, and ultimately, eventually, we pick the stories that we choose. Some of them are foisted on us by our culture or by our religion or by our family or by our entertainments. But we can define our life in any way we want. So not that bad things will never happen to you, because they will, but a lot of how you experience what happens to you is dependent on how you choose to interpret it, and that is something that's a lot more in your control than most people think.
That's true. I just wish the whole hero element translated better into people's lives. So many people do seem to see their lives as a sort of an extension of a film.
Uh-huh.
They seem to give it a cinematic tone, and generally, in a movie where you do have a straight protagonist, that person is is going through something, for lack of
Yeah.
a better term. And hopefully that's a growing experience. And I don't think a lot of people learn from one day to the next. Unfortunately, some people, they have substantial experiences, but they don't grow or learn from them. And well, what a shame too, to make the same mistake over and over again.
It's funny that you bring that up. One of the themes for 2022 is on the very point that you brought up, and I already have several authors lined up.
Mm,
Um, some of them pretty well known, for the things that they wrote, who talk about that thing. There's one book that is written by somebody on how, who's involved with motion pictures, on how to take your life, whatever your life happens to be, and translate it into a blockbuster, the way you interpret your life and live your life, so that you can have, like a much more exciting life in how you tell the story of that life. And then I have another author who went through a lot of stuff that was not that great, and
mhm,
made his way through it. And he used the whole metaphor of the hero's journey. And then we have somebody who's an instructor in the military, at one of the military academies. And he also wrote a very similar book. That's, again, it's more performance based, but it's based on the same premise, that you have control of your story, so you can interpret your life as the story of a victim or a victor. And the choice that you make determines what the quality of your life will be, and really radically, not just, it's not just an attitudinal thing, but it will radically alter how you experience whatever it is you went through.
but I mean, some decisions can be pretty radical.
Yeah.
Uh, I got to tell you, I've tried to live my adult life in sort of a quiet manner. I don't like a lot of hubbub.
Mhm.
Personally, I like to indulge in other people's, cinematically, yeah, of course. But as for myself, I like things pretty calm and peaceful. Uh,
As I get older, that's the same with me too. I like things in my personal life. I
yes.
like stories, and I can look back on my life at various points where I bought those stories to the extent that I was living. So my life was an exciting adventure, which probably was not necessary, but at the time, that's how I viewed it. So that's what I was experiencing. But it's important to know, even like with things what makes you happy, or being content, with the
Mhm.
wonderful things you already have. If you, like, for instance, spend a little bit of time each day think about how grateful you are for the things that are wonderful already in your life, you feel that you're living a wonderful life. And again, the things that you don't want to happen will happen on occasion, but you're calm in and secure in what you already know is awesome and works about your life, so you're less likely to feel victimized by what happens to you, to the extent that many people do. So you don't fall into the universe is against me, or the gods are against me, or my family, or you know
Some
people,
days.
or whatever. You're less likely to to get stuck in those type of stories, if you're in tune with all the good things in your life. And
Well,
again,
but part of that appreciation only comes with age, though.
yeah.
When I gotta say, when I was young, I wasn't happy with anything. Um, even when I would get a new car or something like that, I would think, gosh, I wish I could have gotten, something nicer or something, faster, or whatever. I thought the same thing when we bought our first house. It was like, maybe the next one will be better. But now, I don't feel that way at all. I
Mhm.
don't. Although I have possessions that I value greatly, but not from a status standpoint or anything like that. Just because I like whatever that possession is, and I don't care if anybody else likes it or not. A lot of
That's
that,
a great understanding.
well,
That
and a
is
lot of
such a
that,
profound thing to realize.
and a lot of that only comes with age. When I was young, I was not necessarily a pleasant person, and I think I actually have learned something, over the last, 40, 50 years, I hope.
Well,
Uh,
you're pleasant in all the time that I've known you, and that is a very valuable insight to people. To really, really, really ponder that.
well, yeah, I wish more people would too. The things that are the most important are the hardest to come by, and the things that you can't purchase, like time, you know, that if you could buy time, wow, I probably wouldn't have a penny left. I would certainly buy more. And the relationships that you make, those are so important. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have some lifelong friends, at this point, and unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people do.
No, that's very true. A lot of people don't. Or one of the things I found in me is because I'm a busy person. I'm always busy doing something, and is that a lot of things in life that I felt that I didn't get a lot of, I actually had a lot of it, but I was too busy to notice at the time that I was passing through various stages that I had lots of something that I might have felt that I didn't have enough of, and my perspective shifted because had I done something differently, like pay attention to what else was happening around me other than the thing I was focused on, I would have noticed that there were many wonderful things that in retrospect I would have enjoyed experiencing more. But the realization didn't come until I was in my 50s, and in my 60s it's being reinforced. So that's taught me to at least every day spend some time thinking about all the really cool things I can be experiencing other than the thing I'm primarily focused on. And
But
that's definitely,
be glad you had that realization at all.
yeah.
I'm sorry to say that some people never get there with it. No, age is only a good thing if you get something out of it, if you learn something, uh, if you try to make things better for yourself and everybody else. And if you haven't learned that lesson, if the light bulb doesn't go off in your head, you can be horribly childish and selfish at any age.
That's very true. Very many people are. And on that note,
Yes.
we have to wrap up today's conversation. Any last words for today you'd like to leave people with?
I would just like to say that I was so saddened to hear about Dave Draper. And by all accounts, I've never read one bad thing about him ever, and quite the opposite. Everything has just been, glowing. And I know he had some rough patches in his life, but he was able to turn his life around. A real success story. He hit rock bottom and
Yes.
was able to come all the way back even farther. Just what a great human being, and I'm just sad to hear that he's gone. But he impacted so many people, and that's really the measure of a great life. If you make if you're a positive influence, if you make an impact, a good one, if you leave that with people, I mean, how wonderful. I mean, what a legacy.
Spoken powerfully and truly. Thank you so very much, Brian. How can people enter your world and check out all the really cool things that you've done and that you're doing?
Well, if you are interested in Peplum, go to briansdrive-in-theater.com and visit the Many Faces of Hercules section. There's a lot of different genre detailed at the drive-in, so take a look at it. And if you want to see what the movie of the day is, or any other information about drive-in movie theaters across the nation, just go to Brian's Drive-In Theater in the search box in Facebook, and if you type that in, you will find me.
Thank you again so very much. And thanks to everyone who's watching this or who will be watching it in a couple of days. Until next time, this is us wishing you joyous journeys and amazing adventures. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, Hercules.
And let's see if I click the right thing.